Howdy and welcome. It's the PreAccident Podcast, and I'm your talented and multilingual host, Todd Conklin. Mi llamo is Todd Conklin. How's that? That's multilingual, at least. Hey, today's a big day. Get ready. 2 words for you. Here they come. Ready? Tom Krause. Today we dig into one of the fathers, if not the father, of behavioral-based safety. In fact, I'll bet you there's not an organization out there that's listening today that Tom Krause hasn't either directly or indirectly touched. If you have a BBS program, if you had a BBS program, if you flirted with a BBS program, you flirted with Tom Krause, his ideas, and a company he ran for years and years and years, CEO and sort of principal of BST, Behavioral Safety Technologies, I think. Don't hold me on that one. I was pretty excited to get to talk to Tom because, quite honestly, I would say Tom and I come to the world from a different direction. That's probably a safe way to say that. And I didn't know if this would go well or not go well, or be terrible or not be terrible, and I'll let you be the arbiter of that decision as we progress through. But I think you're going to find this to be a really interesting conversation. I certainly did. I learned some stuff. I got to ask some pretty hard questions. And I got to sort of start the discussion even before we did the podcast around this idea that, 90% of every safety accident happens because of at-risk behavior, which I think is just complete crap. I mean, I don't know where those numbers come from. I don't understand where those... And you know what? Tom took me by the hand and helped me understand not where those numbers came from, but what that represented on the journey we're all on to make organizations safer. So in no way did he defend that, nor would I really expect him to. But what he really did was very carefully talk to me and describe. I think you're going to find the same thing. He's really interested in learning, and he's really, really a good guy. So before we go any further, sit back and relax. I think you'll find this discussion to be a really, really good discussion. This is Tom Krause and a discussion about the new view and behavioral-based safety. Without any further ado, here's the conversation. Why dialogue? Why is dialogue important?
Because that's how we learn things. People learn by human interaction and exchange, and the process is incredibly valuable. But it is undermined by the polarization and disagreement and debate. So that's why dialogue is important in general.
And why disagreement?
Well, because you see a part and I see a part, and there's probably validity to both. But it's the whole that we're looking for. And so when we disagree, there's an opportunity for both of us to learn.
What are you most interested in safety? Right now, where are you? Where's your thinking? Because it's such an honor just to talk to you.
Oh, thank you.
I mean...
I am most interested in patient safety right now. I have been interested the last 10 years in serious injuries and fatalities.
Right.
And that led to the area of people who are accidentally killed in the healthcare system.
Right, which we know is an enormous problem. What does
you and I might know that, but if the we is the community of safety people or the community of healthcare people or the community in general, we don't know how big the problem is.
Yeah, I think you're. Sadly, I think you're right on that, and that's frightening to me. What do you bring to the table on patient safety that other people don't bring?
Having consulted, having understood how organizational safety works outside of healthcare, I have a perspective on how to approach safety in an organization that the healthcare world simply doesn't have.
Let's go back. Why'd you get interested in safety?
I was in private practice.
Right.
I, by coincidence, had 3 patients who had serious back injuries that had developed psychological problems along with them, which is not uncommon. After 6 months of pain, you begin to get hypochondriacal and hysterical and depressed. And you start taking too much analgesic medication, and your family starts to suffer, and it becomes a big psychological mess. So I was treating those people, and there was a company near my office, and by coincidence, I had 3 workers from that company who had back injuries that I was treating.
Right.
I met with the company doctor one day to give him a report on what I was doing with his patients, and I said to him offhandedly, not knowing really what I was saying, it would be easier to prevent these injuries than it is to treat them. And he said, "Oh, that's interesting. Our people tell me that we understand the engineering piece, but that we don't understand the behavioral piece."
Really?
Yeah, this is 1978.
Really?
Yep.
Wow.
And so I said, I think I could shed some light on the behavioral piece. And he said, well, come on over and I'll introduce you to some people. And I went over and he had 6 executives lined up in a room, and they hired me on the spot. It was the easiest deal I ever did.
That's perfect.
So that one thing led to another.
And an entire career,
Yeah.
and a changed world later.
Well, I think that's generous, but yeah.
Yeah, it may be generous. I mean, I don't actually think it is generous. I could be more generous. I could definitely be a sycophant. I mean, that's an easy trip for me. That's not even a long trip. What do you think about the new ideas around safety? Because this is a really important topic, especially with you and I, in that there's kind of a new paradigm. And the new paradigm is really a paradigm that you could take a couple approaches. You could say it builds upon what we've done historically in things like behavioral-based safety, or it counters behavioral-based safety. Is it a threat? Are you upset? Are you worried? You don't seem very upset.
No, I'm not upset at all. I mean, I think development is a good thing, and so I'm strongly in favor of development. And one aspect of what I would think of as new in the safety world is the use of data and using it very effectively. And I think that the changes in technology of the last even 5 years, by which I would include big data and social media.
Right, absolutely.
I think those changes really open up opportunities for creative and highly effective ways of getting at the safety issue. Basically the safety issue is pretty straightforward at its core. It's how to identify hazards and how to get them out of the workplace. That's basically what we're all trying to do. And the new big data and the new social media, for example, offer ways to make that a much, much more efficient process.
What if I countered that by saying, well, there's a couple things, and I want to hit both of them. One is I think hazards are always in the work. So identifying every hazard or identifying hazards is a really slippery slope. I think it gives the illusion that we could control it, but I'm not sure that hazards are controllable. In fact, I would suggest hazards ebb and flow. They move in and out of the workforce all the time. So if workers are constantly having to adapt to hazards, doesn't that put a little chink in our ability to predict it by using data?
I mean, I think it puts a chink in our ability to make the workplace safer, more generally, because it's a moving target.
Right, but the workplace is generally safe. So the crazy thing is that the workplace is mostly safe. Fair enough?
No.
So tell me more. Tell me more. I'm wide open to this.
Yeah. No, I don't agree. I think if you and I went to a representative manufacturing organization today, right now, and walked out and looked at work being done at heights.
Right. Okay. Great example.
And we were not announced. People weren't aware that we were coming, and they didn't plan to meet us. We just walked in the door and went to where people were working at heights. I think we would see highly significant hazards within an hour.
But if they didn't fall, are they still safe?
No.
How do we define safety? I spend a lot of time arguing with people. What is the definition of safe?
Well, it's not about getting injured.
Okay.
I think that part's clear, and
Amen,
I think we'd
brother.
probably agree with that.
Amen,
Yeah,
brother. I'm
yeah,
with you every
yeah.
step of the way.
So it's about exposure to hazards, basically. So if I'm working at heights and the way the fall protection system is set up, it's very, very inconvenient or perhaps
Right.
even impossible
Right,
for me
gotcha.
to get to it.
No place to tie off. Gotcha.
And I'm under production pressure, perceived or real,
Gotcha.
and I need to get this work done. And so am I going to go to an extra 20 minutes to use the fall protection, or am I just going to get the work done?
Right.
And so then I'm working without fall protection in a place and situation where I really should have it.
Right.
And that's what I mean by a hazard. Now, of course, the insidious thing and what makes it difficult to control is that I can do that literally hundreds and thousands of times with nothing without anything happening. And so I can form the view that it's fine to do that.
Right.
The whole organization can get adjusted to that. You know, the boiled frog syndrome. We can just all adjust to that and think that it's really okay. I mean, NASA got used to flying knowing that they had a problem with foam on the external fuel tanks.
Right.
And, normalization of deviance. It just sort of happens. And that is at least part of the puzzle and what makes it challenging to address that.
What's remarkable, though, is that I'm not sure how a worker knows when they've normalized to a deviation. It goes back to kind of what we were talking about at lunch, which is the difference between a very predictable linear world and a very non-predictable complex world. And to me, this new view that people are espousing everywhere really tries to move our thinking away from a classic sort of predictability. I identify the hazard, I manage, enforce, create the behavior around the hazard to make the hazard safe. I then either engineer or mitigate the hazard away, and the work becomes safe. When in reality, I would suggest this notion that hazards are almost unknowable, because hazards are constantly appearing in a non-predictive world, in a complex world, and that pushes us down this line of complexity.
Well, now, some are knowable. Some hazards are
Absolutely.
knowable. But so when you say hazards, you mean all hazards are unknowable.
Yeah.
And I would agree with that. And it's a moving target. That's part of the difficulty. So the way we do the work today isn't necessarily the way we did it yesterday.
Right.
And the changes in the workplace may change the configuration. And so I agree with you, it's a moving target. I mean, I don't know well enough yet what you mean by complexity and linear.
Right.
I know what those mean. I know what those words mean in general, and I know them in science, but I don't know them well enough yet in safety to know what you're talking about in particular. I will say there are certainly opportunities to improve, and complexity theory has its own amazing value.
Right.
And if we can find a way to apply that works, and we can demonstrate that it works, I mean, you wouldn't want to say, well, it's too complex, so we can't demonstrate if it works or not, right?
If people will pay us, I'll say that all day long.
Yeah. So I'm completely open, but I don't really yet understand what you're talking about.
So the challenge I think I have, and again, it's a real challenge, is the notion that I think the idea that work fails because someone did something to cause it to fail, as opposed to the fact that the failure is present in the job all the time. The components that are necessary for an accident to happen are in every job every time you do the job. And that what happens is that normal things align themselves in an unusual way or unexpected way.
Now, when you say someone failed somewhere,
Right.
I think you mean someone very close to the work, someone doing.
Usually the last person to touch it screwed it up.
Right.
Usually.
So, but I don't think you mean. I don't think you mean that you're agnostic with respect to the question of can we actually make the workplace safer. That is to say, somebody can do something.
I actually think I am agnostic.
Really?
Yeah, it's happened over time. So the question I asked you this at dinner earlier this week when we were in D.C., is drunk driving a choice? Does the driver have free agentry? the ability to make the choice, or is drunk driving a mistake?
Yeah, I thought about that conversation.
It's a really
after
great
we
conversation.
Had it. It's an interesting question. So here's my issue with that question. What do you mean by choice, and what do you mean by agency?
Perfect. Those are really good questions.
So if and is this a theoretical or philosophic question, or is it a practical question?
So the quick answer to the latter of the questions is I don't know. In my mind, it's a theoretical question. But I wonder, the more I ponder this question, if it's actually more of a practical question.
Well, it ought to be practical.
I agree.
I mean, that they're paying us to do this practical work. Right.
But I want it to be theoretical because it seems less controversial and less risky and less dangerous. But the more I think about it, I think that this question, it's a really profound question, and it gets to that notion of how I can be agnostic.
Yeah.
Because the outcome of that accident is the same. A young family dies on Interstate 25 because a drunk driver hit them, whether he chose to drive drunk or whether he accidentally drove drunk.
Right.
Is really kind of uninteresting.
Right.
What's interesting is that the outcome, the consequence of that event, is exactly the same. That leads me to question one. What do I mean by choice? Well, that's hard. I think choice, and please disagree with me because I'm wide open to this and no one ever fights me and they all wuss out. I know you won't, but others do. I think choice is almost entirely a retrospective value. That what often looks to be a choice in retrospect was probably more of a response in context.
Okay, so now, are you? I don't think you're suggesting there is no such thing as choice.
No, we have choices.
Some people would say that.
No,
some people would say we're just machines.
Yeah, no, I think we have choices.
You think human beings have agency?
Yeah,
they have choice.
But the question is, and I'm not sure we'll solve this. It's kind of the renaissance here. Is are we free agents, or are we predetermined? And in the workplace, I think that's a really interesting question. I mean, it's wide open for me. I think our systems traditionally tend to see workers as free agents. If a worker would have made a better decision, a better outcome would have happened. I actually think in reality our investigations find that workers are very rarely free agents. That a worker was a part of a larger system and that the behavior the worker exhibited was behavior that is often exhibited in the past. 100 times I've climbed up on a height and not worn fall protection because it's really hard to do. Or it's a behavior that the worker sort of, it's a normally stable system. The worker really didn't see it as high risk.
I hate to disappoint you, but I'm not going to disagree with you on that.
I didn't think you would.
I actually think that's right. It depends, of course, what you mean by very rare. But I think, let me put it this way, I think the great majority of the time, the behavior that the worker engages in is a function of the system in which they are working. And
if that's true, and we tend to agree that that's true, then what's crazy is the tools we're using to desperately and quite seductively manage and measure that system, I think assume the system always responds the same way. It assumes linear predictability. It's a machine.
Well, what measures are you talking about?
Well, the ones that come to mind almost immediately are reportable cases, total reportable cases, days away numbers. Right. But I would actually say lots of our behavioral observation tools over time have drifted into tools where we really look at metrics, but we don't look at the system in which the metrics were created. Well,
and those metrics become compromised.
Yeah, very much so.
And not very many people got this in behavior-based safety, but the original idea was that you weren't gathering safe behavior data in order to accurately reflect how much safe behavior was going on in a given configuration. You were gathering it in order to, one, give feedback to the worker, which increased awareness, which changed the behavior, and two, to gather data on exposure, which if you found enough in the aggregate, you could then problem solve and change the systems to encourage the behavior that you wanted. Some companies that took on behavior-based safety got that and did it, but many of them actually did not.
Well, and in fact, what scares me, and you're exactly right, it's amazing actually to hear you say that, is that the message that kind of got out over time, and I'll grant you it was bastardized by copying somebody who copied somebody who copied somebody, was that behavior is the only tool you have, and if you just nip this notion of at-risk behavior in the bud, stop it before it happens, then the problem gets better. And in many ways, this new philosophical approach to safety is really struggling and benefiting because of those ideas. I have to tell you, you're an amazing person, even though you're going to be humble when I say this. You really changed the language of safety worldwide, and you did it in about 20 years, and it worked beautifully. I think, and I could be wrong on this, but I think our job is to now build from that language to the next place, the next area where we can get better.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense to me. I think your description is generous. I do think that the work that my associates and I did did some good and moved some things in the right direction. I also think that we failed in some important ways. I think we failed to understand serious injuries and fatalities until recently, and that was a big deal. And interestingly, the labor people, who I very strongly disagree with about a lot of things, they had that one right early on. They had the serious injury and fatality thing. At least they had it righter than I did early on. Yeah. And I say that disagreeing with them about many other things. That one I think they got right. And we at BST, and I think the safety community in general has been very slow to recognize that how to approach serious injuries and fatalities, and what they're all about. They're different. They're different kind of phenomena. Right. And Heinrich was wrong that you can reduce the small ones and you'll get to the large ones necessarily in the same motion. That is not correct.
But seductive. It's very attractive.
It sounds great. Yeah. And then you get executives out with clipboards in the parking lot, talking to people about having lids on their coffee cups and thinking that they're discharging their responsibility as senior leaders, when in fact there are real serious design issues in those plants that need to be addressed, that those same executives could be addressing if they understood what they should be doing better. Can I go back to something earlier?
Absolutely.
You were talking about metrics, and you were saying the metrics that we rely on most of the time and probably shouldn't, at least so heavily, are the things like the recordable incident rate and stuff like that. And I want to say I agree with you about that, absolutely. But I'll tell you, the only thing worse than that is not having any metrics at all, and that's where healthcare is. Yeah. Healthcare patient safety does not know how many patients are killed accidentally in the hospital system per year. The only way they have information on that question is by doing extensive and exhaustive chart reviews, meaning they get 1,000 charts and they look at every one of them, they dig into each chart and they find the mistake, and then they count that as one. Now, in a paper that I'm writing right now, I reviewed 8 of those studies across a period of 20 years, and the range of total accidental healthcare patient fatalities is from 44,000 per year to 600,000 per year. Right. So they don't know. There's no federal standard. The paper I'm writing is to advocate for a federal standard for that kind of reporting.
And what scares me about that, well, there's 2 things, and I'd love to talk to you about both of them. But the one that I think is one thing is they don't learn well. They don't investigate. When a patient dies in a hospital, they move to the next patient. That one's interesting, but the one that I think is really interesting is the fact that they've criminalized error.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree with that.
And that if you criminalize mistakes, then what happens is you actually reduce the ability for the organization to even practically understand and collect that data. Yeah. So the data goes away because if we keep the data, then our liability dramatically increases, and we don't want to be known as the worst hospital in the world. We want to be known, as one of the best hospitals in the world.
Right. I think it's not quite accurate to say the patient dies and we go on to the next case. Right. My experience with healthcare providers, nurses and doctors and pharmacists and the others is that they, by and large, are totally dedicated people, and their hearts get wrenched when a patient dies. they feel like they have failed. They take the oath, do no harm. They take it very seriously, and it changes their lives. I mean, I can tell you stories about physicians who have just been turned upside down by a patient dying because of an error or because of something that happened that shouldn't have happened, that's considered an adverse event. But I think you're absolutely right that the system impinges on them in ways that are very negative to doing the right thing after that happens, because they've got to think about, am I going to get sued? They've got to think about, is the hospital going to get sued? It's not something that you can just be public about. And I will also say that issue is moving in the right direction in the last 5 years or so. So, I mean, the current best practice, not that everybody does it, current best practice is when you make a mistake, you go to the family immediately and you tell them, we made a mistake, we're sorry. You apologize profoundly, and you tell them that what you're going to do so that won't happen again, and then you move on. And so then the door is open to fully look into that whole thing and do something about it.
And if that data is correct, if I remember the study I was looking at, the actual number of cases that went to litigation decreased upon the apology.
That's right.
The apology actually de-escalated.
That's right.
Sort of that notion of social fairness.
So it works in both places. But what they're not tuned into is system thinking.
Right.
They're not the physician tradition. This is not true in academic medical centers so much. It's not true in Mayo Clinic, for example. But the community doctor views the hospital as his or her customer.
Right.
And he is the person in charge of the care of this patient.
Right.
So this is my patient. I will take care of him. You, hospital, you're here to help me take care of this patient and do it the way I want it done. Now you're telling me I have to use a checklist when I do this procedure. And I don't see the necessity of doing a checklist.
No, I agree.
And so I'm going to tell you, sorry, I'm not doing the checklist. And that's a failure on my part, on the physician's part, because it isn't simply up to me to keep this patient alive. It's up to me to be a part of a system that operates effectively in the patient's best interest.
But that's an enormous shift in thinking about healthcare.
It sure is.
And that dialogue is vital for us to have. I mean, the only way we can do this is to start the dialogue. This has been amazing. Can we talk again?
Of course.
So let me ask you one other question, because a lot of people listen to this, and actually they're all going to listen to this one. This is very exciting. What should safety professionals be thinking next? What are you thinking next? What interests you, and what should they be interested in your opinion?
Yeah. So the current book that I'm writing is on insights that safety leaders need to have.
Excellent.
And so I believe that what the safety community should be thinking about is, that's the reason I'm writing the book on it, is what is it that the leadership in my organization needs to understand about safety in order to be an effective leader. And I think if they consider that, they will realize that the basics are not understood by senior executive leaders, by supervisors, by plant managers, by operations leaders in general. They don't get the basics. So now why is that? Well, I don't know why it is, but who is going to remedy that if it isn't the safety professional?
Yeah, I was going to say, I can tell you why it is. Because I don't think we spend the time teaching leaders because we think their time is very special and we don't want to waste it. And secondly, I think we think they already know.
Well, that could be, but they sure don't.
They don't know.
And if you get up to the top, it can't be just anybody that educates those people. Because they're busy, they're smart, they don't want to hear a boring safety lecture.
Right.
But they do want to know these things,
right.
Especially after they've had a fatality. They want to know them. And so I think there's a big opportunity for the safety world to figure out what are the core things that leaders need to know, and then how do we convey that stuff to them?
Perfect.
Yep.
Perfect. Thanks for your time.
My pleasure.
Did we do it okay?
Yeah, it was fun.
We're going to live through it?
All right.
All right. You're the best, man.
Okay.
Talk to you later.
So there you have it. What do you think? I thought it was a really great discussion. Tom's a super interesting guy, and there was much going on there. I think one of the things I found so refreshing was how remarkably easy it was to talk to Tom about the new ideas, and how he didn't really present a lot of resistance. He actually was kind of completely on the other side of that equation. and spent a lot of time in dialogue, just as he started the presentation with, and trying to understand. And I think the problem set he's at now, and I love this, I love to talk to early scholars as they progress in their career because you just learn so much. Now he's fixated on how leaders understand and manage and lead safety. And I actually think that's a really important place to have a conversation. That's where we should probably spend some time and think about this a while. It was a great conversation. There will be more. I can assure you that. I thought this was marvelous, and I think Tom Krause is marvelous as well, and I hope you did too. Hey, if you get a chance, subscribe. That always makes a huge difference to the podcast. And as always, keep listening because we've got lots of exciting stuff coming up. There's a guy going to talk about complexity here in a couple weeks that I think will blow you away. Until then, I'm Todd Conklin. This is the PreAccident Podcast, and as always, be safe.